I never thought working at a 7-Eleven gas station in the Pacific Northwest would be anything more than late nights, coffee refills, and the occasional drunk customer stumbling in at 2 a.m. But then I was handed a list of strange rules, rules that made no sense. Rules like don't look at the man who comes in after 3 a.m. If he speaks, don't answer. Or never, under any circumstances, let the lights go out at the pumps. At first, I thought it was some kind of twisted prank. But the first night I broke a rule, I realized they weren't rules at all. They were warnings. And if you work here long enough, you'll see exactly what I mean. Because once the clock strikes midnight, this gas station becomes something else. And the shadows outside aren't just shadows anymore. So if you ever stop at a lonely 7-Eleven in the Pacific Northwest, pray that the cashier inside knows the rules. Welcome back to Dr. Snooze, the place where ordinary jobs turn into chilling nightmares. Tonight, I've got a story that will keep you awake long after the lights go out. A night shift at a lonely 7-Eleven in the Pacific Northwest, where the rules aren't just strange, they're terrifying. And breaking even one of them could cost you more than your job. It could cost you your life. So grab your headphones, dim the lights, and get ready for another haunting tale. And if you're new here, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because you won't want to miss the nightmares we uncover every night. When I first applied for the night shift job at the 7-Eleven gas station, I thought it would be easy money. I was a broke college student, juggling classes during the day, and desperate for any paycheck I could scrape together. The store was in a quiet town, tucked into the woods of the Pacific Northwest, where the roads were often slick with rain and mist clung to the trees like a blanket. I told myself the job would be simple. Scan a few items, sell some gas, maybe clean the coffee station, and spend the rest of the night scrolling on my phone until dawn. I was wrong. The gas station wasn't like the others I had been to. It stood at a lonely intersection where the highway curved into thick forest. The lot was always damp, the neon lights buzzing with an almost sickly hum. A massive fir tree leaned at an odd angle behind the store, its roots breaking through the cracked pavement of the back lot. Even before I started, I noticed that the place felt different, like it didn't belong entirely in this world. On my first night, the manager, a man named Cliff, handed me a thin packet of papers. At first, I thought it was the usual employee handbook, cash register instructions, safety protocols, that sort of thing. But when I flipped through it, I realized it wasn't a handbook at all. It was a list of rules. Rules unlike anything I'd ever seen before. Cliff didn't explain them, not at first. He just gave me a tight smile, his eyes heavy with something I couldn't place, and told me to read carefully. I laughed nervously, thinking it was some kind of elaborate prank. But the look on his face told me he wasn't joking. The rules were typed in plain black ink, but the words unsettled me more than they should have. Rule 1. Always greet the man in the brown coat if he enters. He won't speak. He never does. Just nod and say, "Safe travels." Do not ask where he came from or where he is going. Rule 2. Do not, under any circumstances, look directly into the bathroom mirror between 2:13 a.m. and 2:16 a.m. Rule 3. If a customer pays with coins that feel unusually cold, do not put them in the register. Slide them into the metal lockbox under the counter. Lock it. Do not open it. Rule 4. At exactly 3:33 a.m., turn off all the lights for 3 minutes, no matter who is inside. Even if it is crowded, even if they beg you not to, you must turn them off. Rule 5. Never go outside between 4 and 4:10 a.m., even if someone is pounding on the glass, even if you hear a voice you recognize. Rule 6. If the payphone outside the store rings, do not answer. No exceptions. I remember frowning as I read through the rest. There were about a dozen in total, some stranger than others, but all delivered with that same flat, matter-of-fact tone. They weren't suggestions. They were warnings. I looked up from the paper and chuckled nervously. "This is a joke, right?" I asked. Cliff didn't smile. He just shook his head slowly. "Follow them, and you'll be fine. Ignore them, and you won't last." His words lingered in my mind as the clock ticked closer to midnight. By the time Cliff left me alone that first night, the store was quiet. The shelves were stocked with chips, candy, and lottery tickets. The coffee pot sputtered faintly behind me. Outside, the pumps glistened with rain, reflecting the harsh glow of the buzzing neon sign. I tried to distract myself by cleaning and organizing. For the first couple of hours, everything felt ordinary. A trucker came in, bought a cup of coffee and a hot dog. A tired-looking woman filled her tank and grabbed a pack of gum. The register beeped, the scanner worked, and I began to relax. Maybe the rules were nothing more than a hazing ritual, I thought. But then around 1:45 a.m., the bell above the door chimed, and a man walked in. He wore a long brown coat, heavy and weathered like it had seen years of rain. His hat was pulled low, shadowing his face, and he moved with a stiff, deliberate step. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at anything. He just walked slowly down the aisle, his boots echoing on the linoleum. My stomach tightened as I remembered the first rule. I hesitated for a second before forcing a smile. My voice cracked slightly as I said, "Safe travels." The man stopped. He didn't turn, didn't speak, but he gave the faintest nod before continuing toward the door. Without buying anything, without a word, he left. The bell jingled behind him. The air felt colder. I stood frozen for a moment, my hand still resting on the register. When I glanced outside, I saw the lot was empty. No car, no footsteps, no sign of him at all. I tried to convince myself he must have walked there, maybe from the highway, but something about his presence lingered, an uneasy weight pressing against my chest. I shook it off, poured myself some coffee, and tried not to think about it. At exactly 2:13 a.m., I remembered the second rule. I had been sweeping the floor near the bathroom when I caught myself glancing toward the mirror inside. A thin sliver of it was visible from where I stood. The thought crossed my mind to just peek, to prove to myself it was nothing but glass. But my hands tightened on the broom, and I forced myself to look away. The rule didn't say try not to. It said, do not. I paced back and forth, staring at the clock, waiting for the minutes to pass. The second hand dragged slowly, each tick pounding in my ears. When 2:16 a.m. finally arrived, I let out a shaky laugh and leaned against the counter. Nothing had happened. But for those 3 minutes, I swear the air had been thick, like the store itself was holding its breath. The night dragged on, and around 3:15 a.m., a man came in to buy gas. He was middle-aged, with a scruffy beard and a baseball cap. He dumped a handful of change onto the counter, and as I scooped it up, I noticed how cold it felt. Not just cool, but unnaturally cold, like it had been pulled from a freezer. I froze. Rule 3. Trying not to let my hand tremble, I slid the coins under the counter into the lockbox. The man gave me a look, something unreadable, but didn't say a word. He paid the rest with bills, grabbed his receipt, and walked out. When the clock neared 3:33 a.m., my pulse quickened. I didn't want to do it. The store was empty at the time, but the thought of turning off all the lights unsettled me. Still, the rules were clear. I reached for the switch. The store plunged into darkness. The buzzing neon outside cut out, leaving only the faint glow of the cloudy moonlight through the glass. I stood there in the pitch black, my ears straining. At first, I heard nothing but my own breathing. Then, faintly, I heard footsteps. Not inside the store, outside. Slow, deliberate steps moving across the lot. My throat tightened. I couldn't see a thing, but I felt the presence move closer, closer to the glass door. For 3 long minutes, I stood frozen in the dark, listening. At 3:36, I flipped the lights back on. The lot was empty, but on the glass door, smeared faintly in condensation, were words. "Let us in." The letters faded slowly as I stared, wide-eyed and trembling. I didn't clean them off. I didn't dare. And the night wasn't even over yet. By the time I reached 4 a.m., I was wound tight as a spring. Every creak of the shelves, every hum of the cooler, every tick of the clock felt amplified in the silence. I kept glancing toward the glass doors, half expecting to see faces pressed against them, whispering to be let inside. But the lot remained empty, washed in a gray drizzle that never seemed to end. Rule 5 replayed in my mind like a broken record. Never go outside between 4 and 4:10 a.m., even if someone is pounding on the glass, even if it's a voice you recognize. The warning gnawed at me. I wanted to believe none of this was real, but the man in the brown coat, the freezing coins, and the words on the door told me otherwise. Something was happening here, something that I couldn't explain, and I wasn't sure I wanted to. At 3:58, I set the broom aside and leaned behind the counter. I locked the doors, though Cliff hadn't told me to, and stared at the clock. My stomach turned as the minute hand ticked forward. At 4:02, it began. The pounding came hard, sudden, rattling the glass door so violently that I nearly jumped out of my skin. A voice followed, frantic and desperate. "Hey, please, let me in!" It sounded like a young woman. Her voice cracked, like she'd been running through the rain, her palms slamming again and again against the glass. "Please! They're after me! Open the door!" My heart hammered in my chest. I could see her through the glass, her hair matted with rain, her eyes wide and pleading. She looked real. She looked terrified. For a moment, I almost broke. My instinct screamed at me to help her, to open the door and let her in where it was safe. But the rules were clear. No matter who it was, no matter what they said, don't open the door, don't go outside. I clenched my fists and pressed my back against the counter, shaking my head. "I'm sorry," I whispered under my breath. Her voice grew louder, shrill. "Please, they're right behind me. They're going to kill me. Open the door." Tears stung my eyes. She sounded so real. She slammed the glass harder, and I swore I saw cracks forming. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the pounding stopped. Silence. I hesitated, creeping closer to the window. She was gone. No footprints, no shadow, nothing but the wet asphalt glistening under the pale streetlight. The clock ticked to 4:10, and I collapsed against the counter, my body trembling. I don't know if she had ever been there at all. I don't know if what I saw was a person or something wearing the shape of one. But I do know one thing. If I had opened that door, I wouldn't still be here. The rest of the shift passed in an uneasy blur. No more customers came. No more voices called. I counted every minute until dawn, waiting for Cliff to return. When he finally walked through the door at 6 a.m., I nearly broke down. He looked at me, then at the sweat on my brow, the dark circles under my eyes, and he nodded knowingly. "You followed the rules?" he asked quietly. I swallowed hard. "I think so." He clapped a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Good, that means you'll last." I wanted to ask what all of this was, why the rules existed, what the hell was happening at this place. But Cliff didn't offer answers. He just brewed a fresh pot of coffee, hummed under his breath, and started restocking cigarettes like it was any other day. I left that morning with my nerves shot and my mind racing. I told myself I wouldn't come back. No paycheck was worth this. But when the sun rose and the world looked normal again, it almost felt like a dream. By the time night rolled around, I was already heading back. The second night, I braced myself. I knew what might happen. I knew the rules weren't a joke. And sure enough, things started happening again. Around 1:30 a.m., the man in the brown coat returned. This time I was ready. I nodded, forced the words out, "Safe travels," and waited as he gave me the faintest acknowledgement before slipping back into the mist. At 2:13 a.m., I refused to look toward the bathroom mirror. The hum in the air returned, that same heavy pressure that made my skin crawl. Out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw movement in the glass, a figure standing just behind me, its head cocked at an unnatural angle. But I didn't look. I stared at the floor until the clock hit 2:16, and then it was gone. At 3:33, I flipped off the lights again. The darkness came heavy, smothering, and this time when the lights went out, there were whispers. They slithered through the aisles, faint and breathless, like dozens of voices murmuring just out of reach. I couldn't make out the words, but they circled me, closing in. I gripped the counter until my knuckles turned white, forcing myself not to scream. When the lights came back on, the store was empty. But in the middle of aisle 3, a pack of cigarettes had been ripped open, the tobacco scattered across the floor like dried leaves. By 3:55, I was shaking again, waiting for what I knew was coming, the pounding at the door, the voices, but this time it was worse. At exactly 4:01, I heard my mother's voice. She was calling my name. "Please, honey, it's me. Open the door." I froze. My mom lived 2 states away. She had no way of being here, but the voice was hers. Soft, familiar, the same voice that used to wake me up for school as a kid. My chest ached, my throat tightened. I forced myself to look, and there she was, or something wearing her face. She stood at the door, her hand pressed against the glass, her eyes wide and pleading. Rain dripped down her hair, her lips trembling as she called to me again. "Please, it's so cold. Just let me in." I backed away, tears stinging my eyes. My mind screamed that it wasn't her, that it couldn't be, but my heart twisted with guilt, with longing, with fear. She pounded harder, her voice breaking. "Don't you recognize me? I'm your mother." The sound rattled my skull. I pressed my hands against my ears, choking back a sob, and crouched behind the counter until the clock struck 4:10. When I finally looked up, she was gone. The rain continued to fall. The lot was empty. And yet in the silence, I swore I could still hear her voice echoing in my mind. The shift dragged until dawn. I barely spoke when Cliff returned, and this time he studied me closely. "You heard her, didn't you?" he asked. I blinked, my throat dry. "You mean my mom?" He didn't answer directly. He just sighed, heavy and tired. "That's how they get to you. They use voices you trust. That's why the rules are there." I wanted to scream at him, demand to know what they were, what this place was, why any of it was happening. But deep down, I knew he wouldn't tell me. Maybe he couldn't, so I went home, crawled into bed, and stared at the ceiling until sleep finally dragged me under. But even in my dreams, I could still hear her voice, calling to me, begging me, and I knew the next night would be worse. By the third night, I wasn't sure if I was more afraid of the gas station or myself. The rules were clear, and so far I had followed them to the letter. But the longer I stayed, the more the voices chipped away at me, wearing me down like water against stone. I was beginning to understand why Cliff had said, "If you ignore them, you won't last." The store seemed different now. It wasn't just a building, it was alive, breathing, watching me. The humming lights, the groaning coolers, the way the shadows seemed thicker than they should be. I'd catch myself staring at the glass doors, waiting for something to appear. And sometimes I thought I could see faces in the reflection. I told myself I'd quit. Each morning, as the sun rose and the world looked normal again, I swore I'd never go back. But when night came, I found myself driving to the station anyway, like something was pulling me back. That third shift began quietly. The rain was light, the highway almost empty. A few truckers stopped for coffee, their tired faces glazed with exhaustion. A young couple bought snacks and Red Bull before vanishing into the night. For a while, I thought maybe the rules wouldn't matter this time. Maybe nothing strange would happen. I was wrong. It started around 1:20 a.m. I was refilling the hot dog rollers when I heard the bell above the door jingle. I looked up, expecting a customer. Instead, the man in the brown coat stood in the doorway. I swallowed hard, forcing out the words, "Safe travels." He paused longer this time, his hat shadowing his face, his boots dripping rain onto the tiles. Slowly, he turned his head, not toward me, but toward the back of the store. Then he left, silent as ever, disappearing into the mist. I stared at the door for several minutes after he was gone, my skin prickling. Why had he looked toward the back? I tried to shake it off, but I couldn't stop glancing toward the storeroom door. It was closed, but something about it unsettled me now. At 2:13, I braced myself. I stood behind the counter, refusing to look at the bathroom mirror. The air grew heavy again, pressing down on me, and from the corner of my eye, I saw something move. At first, it was just a flicker, then clearer. Someone standing in the mirror, not me. The figure was tall, thin, and bent at odd angles. Its head twitched in short, sharp motions, its mouth stretched into a grin too wide to be human. I gripped the counter so hard my knuckles turned white, refusing to turn my head. The figure lifted its hand in the reflection and pointed right at me. The clock ticked slowly, painfully, until 2:16. When the minute passed, the air lightened and the reflection vanished. I exhaled shakily, wiping sweat from my brow. The store felt colder now. By 3:30, the lot was empty, the rain falling harder. My nerves frayed as the clock ticked toward 3:33. I flicked off the lights, and once again the world plunged into blackness. This time, I didn't just hear whispers. I saw them. Shapes moved between the aisles, pale, blurry outlines like people made of smoke. Their heads turned toward me, their voices layering into a low chorus. "Let us in. Come with us. You don't belong here." My throat closed up. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I clutched the counter and repeated the rules in my head, over and over, like a prayer. At 3:36, I flipped the lights back on, and the store was empty. But every pack of cigarettes had been knocked from the shelves, scattered across the floor like someone had walked through and dragged their hands across them. I was still kneeling to clean up the mess when the clock hit 4. I froze. The pounding came immediately, louder than before. The door rattled in its frame and a deep voice boomed through the glass. It's the police. Open up. My heart skipped. A uniformed man stood outside, flashlight in hand, badge glinting on his chest. Rain soaked his cap and his breath fogged the glass. Open the door, he barked. Now. Every instinct screamed at me to obey. But the rule was absolute. Don't go outside. Don't open the door. I can't, I whispered. The pounding grew harder. You're interfering with police business. Let me in. I backed away, shaking my head. I'm sorry. His face twisted in fury. He slammed the flashlight against the glass, cracking it. If you don't open this goddamn door, I'll... The clock struck 4:10. The sound stopped. When I dared to look again, the lot was empty. The cracked glass was smooth and whole again, as if nothing had touched it. I slumped to the floor, my body trembling. I thought that would be the worst of it. But I was wrong. At 4:27, long after the danger should have passed, the payphone outside rang. The sound sliced through the silence, sharp and metallic. Rule 6, never answer the payphone. I gritted my teeth, staring at the receiver swinging gently in rain. The ringing grew louder, echoing through the store, vibrating in my skull. I tried to ignore it. I tried to focus on stocking the shelves, on anything else. But the sound wouldn't stop. Finally, I pressed my hands over my ears and crouched behind the counter. And that's when I heard it, my name. The phone wasn't just ringing. A voice was calling to me from the other side. Hello? It whispered, muffled through the glass. Please pick up. I need to tell you something. My stomach lurched. It was my own voice. Please, it begged. If you don't answer, you'll die tonight. The ringing stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than the sound itself. I didn't move until dawn. When Cliff arrived, I told him everything. The man in the mirror, the fake cop, the phone. My words tumbled out, frantic, desperate for answers. He just listened quietly, his expression grim. When I finished, he nodded slowly. You did good. You followed the rules. That's all that matters. I slammed my hands on the counter. That's all that matters? What the hell is going on here, Cliff? What are these things? His eyes were tired, haunted. He poured himself a cup of coffee before answering. They're not things, he said finally. Not exactly. They're echoes, shadows, pieces of what doesn't belong. This place sits on a line between worlds. That's why the rules exist. They keep the balance. I stared at him, my mouth dry. And what happens if I break them? He looked at me for a long moment, then said softly, Then you'll learn what's on the other side of the glass. I didn't ask again. But as I drove home that morning, exhausted and shaken, one thought kept clawing at me. I was already hearing my own voice on the phone. How long until I saw myself standing outside the door? By the fourth night, I realized I wasn't just afraid anymore. I was exhausted. Fear had worn me down, grinding against my nerves until every sound felt unbearable. The hum of the neon, the hiss of the coffee machine, the groan of the cooler doors, it all clawed at me like nails on glass. Still, I returned. I couldn't stop myself. Maybe it was the paycheck, maybe it was pride, maybe it was something else, the strange pull of the station itself, like the place wanted me there. Cliff didn't say much when I clocked in. He just gave me his usual look, that mix of pity and warning, and told me, remember the rules, they're all you've got. The night began quietly. I stocked shelves, wiped down counters, tried to breathe through the unease, but deep down, I knew it wouldn't last. It never did. At 1:05, the bell over the door jingled. I looked up, bracing myself. It wasn't the man in the brown coat this time. It was a boy. Couldn't have been older than 12. His hoodie was soaked from the rain, his sneakers squeaked on the tile, and his hair clung to his forehead. He shuffled to the counter, his eyes downcast. Hey, kid, I said carefully. You okay? He didn't answer. He just set a dollar bill on the counter and whispered, for the candy. I scanned a chocolate bar and gave him his change. When I dropped the coins into his palm, I nearly recoiled. They were freezing. Rule 3. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. Enjoy the candy. He didn't move. His eyes lifted, and for the first time I saw his face. His eyes were black, not dark brown, not hazel, black, like ink spilling across the whites. I froze, the cold coins biting into my skin. The boy smiled faintly and walked to the door. He didn't push it open. He simply faded. One moment he was there, the next he was gone. The door never moved. My breath came in shallow gasps as I shoved the coins into the lockbox and snapped it shut. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the key. For the rest of that hour, I couldn't stop glancing at the door, half expecting him to reappear. At 2:13, I avoided the mirror again. But this time, I didn't just feel the air pressing in. I heard breathing. It was coming from the bathroom. Slow, ragged breaths, like someone was standing just beyond the door, their mouth pressed against the mirror. I backed away, my skin crawling. The breathing continued until 2:16, when it stopped abruptly. At 2:20, a man entered the store. He was tall, thin, with sunken cheeks and clothes too big for him. He grabbed a pack of gum and shuffled to the counter. When I reached for the bills he handed me, his hand lingered on mine. His skin was ice cold. "You don't belong here," he whispered. The words were so faint I almost thought I imagined them. He dropped the gum and walked out, leaving the door swinging behind him. I stood frozen, staring at the gum on the counter. It was wet, like it had been pulled from a river. By 3:30, my nerves were shredded. I hovered by the light switch, waiting for 3:33. My stomach churned as the clock ticked forward. I flicked the lights off. This time, the whispers were louder, clearer. "We see you." "You don't belong." "You're already one of us." Shapes moved through the aisles again, but they were clearer now. Less smoke, more form. I saw faces, faces I knew. My mother, my childhood best friend, even Cliff, staring at me with dead eyes. I clamped my hands over my ears, rocking on my heels, whispering to myself, "It's not real, it's not real, it's not real." At 3:36, the lights came back, but the shapes didn't vanish this time. A woman stood in aisle 4, her hair dripping water onto the floor. She stared at me, her face pale and blank, her mouth hanging open. I blinked and she was gone. The floor where she had stood was soaked. I didn't clean it. I couldn't bring myself to move. At 4, I braced for the pounding. But it didn't come. The silence was worse. The lot was empty, the rain falling harder, the neon buzzing faintly. I thought maybe, just maybe, the voices wouldn't come. Then I heard my own voice. "Hey, open the door." I froze. The sound was unmistakable. My own tone, my own inflection, echoing through the glass. I turned slowly, and there I was, standing outside in the rain. I was soaked, pale, staring back at myself with a hollow smile. "Come on," the other me said softly. "You're tired. Just open the door. Let's trade places." My chest tightened. My head spun. I stumbled back, shaking violently. The other me pressed his hand to the glass, tilting his head. His smile widened. "Don't you want to rest? I'll take over. Just unlock it." I shook my head, choking out the words. "You're not me." His smile dropped, his eyes narrowing. He slammed his palm against the glass, rattling the door. "Open it." The clock struck 4:10, and he vanished. The lot was empty again. But when I looked down, I saw wet handprints smeared across the glass. They were mine. The rest of the shift passed in a blur. I couldn't think, couldn't breathe. When Cliff arrived, I nearly collapsed into him, spilling everything. The boy with black eyes, the whispers, the other version of me at the door. Cliff's face tightened. For the first time since I'd started, he looked genuinely afraid. "They're getting bolder," he muttered. "That's not good." I grabbed his arm. "What do they want?" He looked me dead in the eye. "They want to replace you. They want to wear your skin and walk out into the world. That's why the rules exist, to keep them on the other side." My blood ran cold. "And if I break them?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. That morning, as I drove home, every face I passed on the street looked strange. Off. Too still. Too quiet. I couldn't shake the feeling that some of them weren't real people at all. And for the first time, I wondered if Cliff himself was still human. The storm had finally broken sometime after 4 in the morning, lashing the gas station with sheets of rain that rattled the awning and howled against the glass doors. Thunder cracked so violently that the building trembled, and each flash of lightning revealed the Pacific Northwest forest looming darker and more twisted than it had any right to be. The neon signs buzzed erratically, glowing pale green one moment and then flickering out the next. I was already raw from fear, my nerves stretched too thin, but I forced myself to keep following the rules, one after another, like prayers repeated in the dark. At precisely 4:15, the station's back door began to rattle. I froze, the clipboard heavy in my hands. That door was supposed to stay locked at all times, another one of the rules Sam had underlined twice in red ink. Never open the back door for anyone. I'd obeyed that faithfully. The only time I'd even dared to peek through its little wire-meshed window, There had been nothing but mist and shadows beyond. Now something, or someone, was trying to come in. The handle jerked again, hard enough that I saw the screws in the latch quiver. Then the knocking began, sharp and deliberate. It was not the frantic pounding of a stranger caught in the storm. It was patient, calculated. A man's voice came muffled through the steel. "Hey, let me in! It's freezing out here!" My throat went dry. I knew better than to answer, but silence felt unbearable. The knocking grew louder, as though whoever stood outside knew I was listening, knew I was right there on the other side. "I'm not dangerous," the voice said, softer now, almost coaxing. "I just need a place to wait out the storm. Be a good neighbor, huh?" I gripped the clipboard until my knuckles turned white. The rules spun through my mind. Do not open the back door. Do not open it under any circumstances. But it wasn't just the words that kept me rooted. It was the tone of the voice. Something about it didn't sit right. It sounded human, yes, but there was a strange cadence, a dragging of syllables, as if he were learning the words rather than speaking them naturally. Another thunderclap rolled through, and in the flash of lightning I risked a glance at the little window. My stomach dropped. A man stood there, drenched in rain. His face was pressed close to the glass, but his eyes, God, his eyes weren't right. They were wide, too wide, the whites almost glowing in the dim light. And his smile stretched too far, as if his skin had been pulled into place by invisible hooks. I stumbled back, heart slamming against my ribs. The knocking ceased. The man's lips moved, and though the storm raged, I heard him as clear as if he were whispering directly into my ear. "Break the rules, just once." I clamped my hands over my ears, but his voice was inside my head now. The clipboard slipped from my grasp and clattered to the floor. I squeezed my eyes shut, muttering to myself that dawn was coming, that the rules would hold as long as I did. When I dared to look again, the window was empty. But the doorframe was warped, bent inward as if something massive had pressed against it. I staggered back to the counter and sat there, staring at the distorted steel until my shift phone buzzed violently. The sudden sound nearly sent me tumbling off the stool. With shaking hands, I answered. Sam's voice came through, clipped and urgent. "Don't open the back door." "I didn't," I rasped. "But Sam, what the hell is happening out here?" Static swallowed the line for several seconds before his voice returned, lower and graver. "You're seeing it now. It's testing you. If you'd opened that door, you wouldn't be talking to me right now. Remember, the rules aren't guidelines. They're the only thing keeping you alive." Then the line went dead again. The clock on the wall showed 4:35. I still had nearly 2 hours before dawn. 2 more hours in this nightmare. I tried distracting myself with busy work, checking inventory, rearranging shelves, but the storm was relentless, and the gas station seemed alive with sound. The cooler hummed louder than usual, like a swarm of bees trapped inside. The fluorescent lights above me hissed and buzzed. And beneath it all was another sound. Faint but steady, a low humming, as though someone were singing through the walls. I traced it back to the freezer. The humming grew louder the closer I got, until it vibrated through the steel door. It was a lullaby, the kind a mother might hum to a child. I recognized none of the words, but the tune wound its way into my chest, making my heartbeat slow against my will. I realized I was reaching for the handle without meaning to. I wrenched my hand back and stumbled away. The rules didn't say anything about the freezer. They didn't have to. Some doors were never meant to be opened. I locked myself in the employee restroom and sat on the toilet lid, clutching my phone like a lifeline. I counted the seconds, waiting for them to pass faster. But time seemed broken. Minutes stretched impossibly long, each one a struggle against the pull of exhaustion and dread. That's when the scratching began. At first I thought it was the storm again, branches scraping against the roof. But the sound was coming from the floor. I glanced down and saw a crack spreading across the linoleum tiles, tiny flakes peeling up as something scraped against the underside. The scratching was rhythmic, almost eager, as though claws were carving their way toward me. I bolted out of the restroom, slamming the door shut behind me. The humming had stopped. The cooler lights flickered and went black, leaving the store in partial darkness. I clung to the counter, whispering to myself that dawn was close, that I just needed to hold out a little longer. The front doors creaked suddenly. Slowly, with agonizing patience, they began to open on their own. The wind roared inside, carrying with it the scent of wet pine and something sour like rotting meat. I watched, frozen, as figures began to gather just beyond the threshold. Their shapes were human enough, but blurred, like shadows caught between worlds. Their faces were indistinct, melting and reforming as if they couldn't decide what expression to wear. One of them stepped forward, and my breath caught. It was the man from the back door, his wide eyes fixed on me, his smile carved deeper into his face. He raised one hand and pointed straight at me. Then, in a voice that shook the shelves and rattled the glass, they all spoke at once. "Break the rules." The doors slammed shut with a deafening bang, leaving only silence behind. I collapsed against the counter, trembling violently. The storm outside seemed to quiet after that, as if the figures had taken the worst of it with them. When the clock finally ticked to 6 a.m., I barely had the strength to move. But with the first light of dawn creeping across the lot, the gas station seemed almost normal again. The cooler lights blinked back on. The neon signs steadied. The smell of rot faded into the crisp scent of rain-soaked earth. The shift phone rang. Sam's voice was calm this time, almost casual. "You made it. Good. But listen carefully. What you saw tonight isn't gone. It's waiting. Every night it waits, and if you ever break the rules even once, it'll take you." He paused, then added, "Don't let it take you." The line went dead. I sat there long after dawn, staring at the warped back door, knowing I had only bought myself one more night of survival. The next night, everything felt wrong from the very start. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days straight, coming down in relentless sheets that turned the road outside into a mirror of broken neon light. The store's flickering sign buzzed louder than usual, a metallic hum that grated against my nerves. I stepped inside, dripping wet, and the air was thick, warmer than it should have been, as though the walls were breathing. I knew tonight would not be normal. The rule sheet was already waiting for me at the counter, though I hadn't pulled it from the drawer. It lay there flat and deliberate, the edges damp, as if someone had handled it with wet hands. I hesitated before touching it. The ink seemed darker than before, fresher, as though the rules had been rewritten in some sort of liquid. One line had changed. It still read, "Never look in the bathroom mirror after midnight." But beneath it, scrawled in shaky handwriting I didn't recognize, was something new. "You've already broken this rule." I froze. My throat tightened. The mirror, weeks ago, that night, when curiosity had gotten the better of me, I had looked. I had tried to convince myself it was harmless, that nothing had happened, but something had. That face staring back at me with the smile too wide, the eyes too hollow. And now the rules knew. The phone rang. Not the store phone. My personal cell, buzzing in my pocket. I pulled it out with shaking fingers. The screen was black. No number displayed, just the word self. Against every instinct screaming in my chest, I answered. A voice that was mine, but not mine, spoke from the other end. "You can't keep pretending. You let me in." I dropped the phone, and it clattered across the floor, still buzzing. My stomach twisted. My own voice, but dripping with static and malice. I kicked the phone under the counter and tried to steady my breathing. A sound broke the silence. Knocking. Not at the front door this time, but from the storage room in the back. Sharp, steady, 3 knocks, then silence. The rules. Rule number 4. If someone knocks at the back door, ignore it. Do not answer, no matter who it sounds like. But this wasn't the back door. This was inside. Something was already in the building. The knocking repeated, louder, rattling the shelves. I forced myself to move, gripping the flashlight I'd taken to carrying. The beam shook across the room, landing on the door to the storage area. It was bulging inward, the wood splintering slightly with each knock. I stepped back, whispering to myself to breathe, to follow the rules. Do not answer. The knocking stopped. Silence filled the air so thick it pressed against my eardrums. I turned the flashlight off, hoping darkness would protect me. But then from behind the door, my own voice spoke again. "Let me out." The words were so calm, so steady, as though I were standing right behind the door. My skin crawled. My knees went weak. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. I stumbled backward until my shoulder hit the cooler door. The condensation was slick and cold against my shirt. My reflection stared back at me in the glass, and for a second I thought I saw movement. My reflection blinked out of sync with me. I looked away. heart hammering. The clock above the register read 11:58. Midnight was coming. The rules, the mirror rule, the one I had broken. The lights flickered once, then went out completely. The hum of the refrigerators died, leaving only the sound of rain hammering the roof. The store was swallowed in black. Then came the laughter. It started faint, as though someone were giggling from down the road. But it grew, circling the building, slipping through the cracks in the windows, weaving around me. It wasn't one voice. It was dozens, all laughing in a chorus that rose and fell like the tide. Some were high-pitched, some low, some broken and rasping. And threaded through them all was my own laugh, louder than the rest. The emergency light snapped on, bathing the store in red. The aisles stretched longer than they should have, shelves warping and bending like they were melting. The rules sheet was still on the counter, but the words were shifting, writhing like worms. I leaned closer, against my better judgment, and forced myself to read. A new rule had appeared. When the lights go red, you cannot leave. You belong to the station now. I staggered back, chest tight, bile rising in my throat. My phone buzzed again beneath the counter. Against all sanity, I crouched and pulled it out. The screen lit up with the camera app open. My face filled the screen, but it wasn't mine. The skin was stretched too thin, the smile carved too wide, the eyes pools of black. It spoke without me moving my lips. You're not the one telling this story anymore. The glass of the phone screen cracked from the inside, and the image distorted, but the face kept smiling. I threw it across the room, and it shattered against the far wall. The laughter stopped. Silence fell again, crushing and absolute. The red lights flickered once, twice, then went out, plunging me into blackness again. I held my breath. My pulse thundered in my ears. When the lights came back, I was no longer in the store. The aisles were gone. The counter, the hum of the refrigerators, the rain outside, all gone. I was standing in a vast empty room with walls that stretched into darkness. A single mirror stood in the center, tall and ancient, its frame carved with twisting shapes I couldn't understand. And in the mirror, my reflection smiled. It stepped forward. I stayed still, frozen in terror, but the reflection didn't. It moved closer until it pressed its hand against the glass. I whispered, "This isn't real." But the reflection's lips curled wider. Its hand pushed through the mirror like water, slick and glistening, reaching for me. I stumbled back, but the floor beneath me was soft like stepping into mud. My legs sank. The reflection climbed free of the mirror, pulling itself into my world. Its skin dripped like wax, its eyes hollow, its grin endless. It leaned close, breath cold against my ear. "You broke the rules. Now I get to keep you." The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed me whole was its face merging with mine in the mirror. My body moving without me, my smile stretching too wide, and somewhere far away I could still hear the neon sign buzzing. The gas station still stood on the rainy road in the Pacific Northwest, still open, still waiting for the next person who thought the rules were just rules. Thank you for staying with me through this chilling tale of the 7-Eleven in the Pacific Northwest, where the rules are more dangerous than the darkness outside. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to keep the nightmares coming. Now, tell me in the comments, if you had to work that night shift, do you think you could follow every rule? Or would curiosity get the better of you? Until next time, this is Dr. Snooze, reminding you, some jobs are scarier than they seem.